turbulent life, from his thrill-seeking trips into war zones, to his battles with addiction, to the myths and truths surrounding one of America's most enigmatic writers. Please join me in welcoming Ted Geltner.
Thanks, Rich. Great introduction.
Thank you.
Whoa. Woo. Just up my show and tell bag right here. Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Good. It's great to be in Iowa. I'm having a great time here already. I love it here. They love writers so much. I went out this morning just to take a walk, and you guys probably know about this if you live here, but I found a street where like every few blocks or every half a block there's like another quote from a writer. You're just like walking down the street and it's Raymond Carver and Gail Godwin or whatever, you know. So this is my kind of town. I love it here. All right, so I'm going to talk about Denis Johnson today. I've got this mic so I can walk around. I probably walk all through the aisles and everything and say hi to everybody. But so what I have planned is I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to tell you a little story of my research into this Denis Johnson biography. And then I'm going to read a little bit from it. And then after that I have something else that's not on the program, but I'm hoping you'll stick around for that too. And then I have a whole bag full of stuff, so I can go on for a long time. But first I'm going to start with Denis Johnson. So, but I wanted to I said that nice stuff about Iowa. I have more ways to curry favor with you before I even get to that. I have these T-shirts I made. Look at these. So these are nice. So if everyone sticks around, this is how they roll them up, like when they shoot them out of T-shirt cannons. So I'm going to be throwing one. I've always wanted to throw one of these. So later on. All right. All right. So Denis Johnson. So quick, just 2-minute little bio for people who, you know, well, how many people are big Denis Johnson fans? A lot of people, yeah. So, but maybe there's some people that don't know that much about him. So just a quick little bio. Denis Johnson was born in 1949 in Munich, Germany. His dad was a soldier in Patton's army in World War II. And Alfred Johnson, his dad, was one of the first soldiers, or among the first soldiers to cross over France into Germany when the American army was, the Allies were conquering the Nazis. So he was a war hero, and he parlayed that into a career in the State Department, and took his family. He got married, and Denis was born in Germany, and they went back to the States for a while, and then he was transferred to Tokyo, post-war Tokyo, you know, ravaged by the war. This is where Denis grew up in elementary school, and eventually got transferred to Manila, and so Denis spent, you know, his middle school and early high school years in the Philippines. And then he gets transferred back to, Alfred gets transferred back to the States, and Denis comes back to finish out high school in Washington, D.C. And this is where he gets interested in the beat poets and Jack Kerouac, and he becomes, you know, he loved writing as a kid, but now he really, you know, is hooked into it. He decides he wants to be a poet. So he comes here to Iowa City. You know, he knows that this is when the Iowa Writers Workshop is just starting to become, you know, like what it is today, known as, you know, where you know, brilliant young writers come, and he wants to do that. So he comes here, and it turns out he is a brilliant young writer. He's better than all of his peers. You know, he has a book published, a book of poetry published when he's only 20 years old. And all of his peers are, you know, he's not even in grad school, he's an undergraduate. And all the people in the graduate writing program are jealous of him. But while he's in Iowa City, he also discovers that he likes heroin and other hard drugs. And that, you know, changes the course of his life a little bit. And he starts to, you know, he he finishes grad school, and he, that writes a lot of great poems and does a lot of great writing while he's here, but then he starts to kind of drift around the country and have, drug-related adventures that will later become, great literature. But at the time, were just drug-related adventures. And then, so he wanders the country, and then he sobers up, and he moves back in with his parents in Arizona, and this is when he starts to write, and he becomes the Denis Johnson that the world knows. And he writes a few novels, and he's a publishing novelist. But then at some point, as I reach into my show and tell bag, he writes this book, or he publishes this book, Jesus' Son, and this kind of propels him to a new level of fame, and it's successful, and based on those years when he was here in Iowa City and after, and all the adventures he had. So, Jesus' Son. So the story the research I'm going to tell you a little about today is from a story in this book. It's actually the first story in this book. It's called Car Crash While Hitchhiking. And I'm just to get us warmed up for this little backstory, I will read you a couple paragraphs from this at the beginning. Maybe the one of the most famous things that he ever wrote in a career filled with a lot of famous writing. So, a salesman who shared his liquor and steered while sleeping, a Cherokee filled with bourbon, a VW no more than a bubble of hashish fumes, captained by a college student, and a family from Marshalltown who head-oned and killed forever a man driving west out of Bethany, Missouri. I rose up sopping wet from sleeping under the pouring rain and something less than conscious, thanks to the first three of the people I've already named, the salesman and the Indian and the student, all of whom had given me drugs. At the head of the entrance ramp, I waited without hope of a ride. What was the point, even, of rolling up my sleeping bag when I was too wet to be let into anybody's car? I draped it around me like a cape. The downpour raked the asphalt and gurgled in the ruts. My thoughts zoomed pitifully. The traveling salesman had fed me pills that made the linings of my veins feel scraped out. My jaw ached. I knew every raindrop by its name. I sensed everything before it happened. I knew a certain Oldsmobile would stop for me even before it slowed, and by the sweet voices of the family inside, I knew we'd have an accident in the storm. I didn't care. They said they'd take me all the way. The man and his wife put the little girl up front with them and left the baby in the back with me and my dripping bedroll. I'm not taking you anywhere fast, the man said. I've got my wife and babies here, that's why. So, anyone know that story? I've heard this before, a little bit, some people. All right, so I'm writing a biography on Denis Johnson, and so I've written a couple biographies, and I know a lot of biographers. You never really know how autobiographical a writer is, especially when you're writing about fiction. I mean, the most far-out science fiction writer, that's writing about Martians or whatever, spaceships, whatever, there's still going to be a germ of his life in there. Because he's the writer, right? And it comes out of his, okay, we're switching mics. All right. Both mics I should use?
Yeah, you're fine.
All right, okay. So, anyway, I don't know if Denis Johnson was ever in a car crash or not. Some writers, even though he's known as an autobiographical writer, a lot of writers, maybe they'll take a character from their life or hear about an incident, and that's where their fiction comes from. So anyway, I'm starting on this biography. I don't know if Denis Johnson's ever been in a car accident or not. But so I start to think, well, maybe he is, maybe he has. And early on in the research, I'm talking to one of his college friends. And the friend tells me, oh, yeah, at some point in the conversation, Denis got back from summer break, and he had this crazy story. He said he was in a car accident, and somebody died, and there were beer cans all over the bridge, and so I'm thinking, well, this is, when he's in college, he's telling people this story. This probably happened, right? So as a biographer, then I become obsessed with this. Like, I have to find this story, So I'm, digging through databases and looking at old newspapers and anything I can to try to find any trace of this car accident. And I'll find like something that kind of sounds a little bit like it. Maybe this was it, but there's always some detail that like, it couldn't, it wasn't the right time of day, or it didn't have the right number of people, or the kids weren't right, So that went on, and I'm searching, like, whenever I have spare time, I'm looking and looking, and 6 months, 9 months, there's a lot of other stuff, other research to do, so I kind of gave it up. And then, like a year later, I'm talking to another classmate of his from college, and this guy tells me, yeah, Denis came back from and had this great story, but it wasn't after summer break. It was some other time. And what had happened was he got into a fight with his parents, and he just took off, and that's why he had hitchhiked back. So it didn't. So that changes the parameter of my search. So I start the search over again. I start looking for this crash, and go back to the databases, and then I find this as I dig into my bag again, from the St. Joseph News Press Gazette, April 21, 1972. This is just a few paragraphs. I'm going to read it to you. This has definitely never been read in public before. What this is right here, this is the first version of car crash while hitchhiking. So the St. Joseph News Press Gazette decided instead to call it Bethany Man Dies in Car Crash. Also not a bad title, right? Denis could have done that. All right, ready for this? This is a different take on car crash while hitchhiking than Denis did. A Bethany man was killed, and 4 members of a Wichita, Kansas family were hurt in a 2-car accident shortly after midnight on Highway 69, 5 miles south of Bethany. The State Highway Patrol said William L. Webb, 39, was pronounced dead on arrival at Knoll Hospital in Bethany. Taken to the hospital for treatment were Craig Eckhart, 26, Wichita, who had lacerations and abrasions about the head and body, his wife, Janice Sue Eckhart, 26, who suffered a fractured shoulder and a head injury, their 4-year-old daughter, Lori Eckhart, who had a fractured leg, and a 1-year-old daughter, Cindy Eckhart, who escaped with only abrasions. According to the patrol, Mr. Webb was driving south, hit a bridge on the right side, and spun onto the bridge, where his car was struck by the northbound car driven by Mr. Eckhart. Both cars were demolished. The body was taken to Noble Funeral Home at Bethany. So this doesn't go as deeply into it as Denis would later go into it, right? So anyway, so I have this article, but I would not, so this article, this is in the St. Joseph's Gazette. The Bethany newspaper, I forget what it's called, isn't digitized. So the editor of that paper in 1972 decided to send just a few paragraphs to the St. Joseph's Gazette. That got published, it's digitized. Otherwise, I never would have found it. The only way to go to to get the Bethany paper, you have to go into the little office in Bethany, Missouri, and into the back room, and they have them bound in these dusty old volumes that I'm sure no one has looked at until I showed up there, And then they have really good coverage of that, of the accident. So anyway, so now I had this article, and so now I'm pretty sure at this point it's really, this is the crash, right? Sounds like what I read you, right? But no Denis Johnson, right? So you can't really be sure at this point. So then I started doing a little more research, and then I got this. The police report from the actual crash of car crash while hitchhiking. And, it has all about, like, the bridge and when it happened. And here we have the list of people involved in the crash. We've got poor William Webb, who doesn't know it but has been, become, he's in literary history now. We have Craig Eckhart, Lori Sue, Cindy Lee, Janice, and then look at the bottom there, Denis Hale Johnson. So he was in, now I know he's in the crash, right? at 518 Hawkeye Drive, Iowa City, Iowa. So now I know that he's in there. But then, now I have this document. I have to go looking for the people. So I found, let's see, this guy's name again. The guy who wrote this report, John Jones, the officer. He was there, found John Jones. He's still around. He doesn't remember this. But I talked to him anyway. He's a nice guy. And then the newspaper reporter who wrote this, he's still around. He's the publisher of the Bethany, whatever it is. I can't remember. So I went to see him, and he told me all about it. But then I have to find Craig Leland Eckhart, Lori Sue Eckhart, and the children, I guess. So anyway, so I start looking for them. And I find, what I think is a good phone number for that. I call, no answer, leave a message, no one calls me back. Find a good email for them. This is going to get them. No response. Then I find them on Facebook, and there they are. Like I can see them on there celebrating July 4th. They had a party or something, and I Facebooked them, but no luck there either. They don't respond. So the only thing left to do is I have to fly here to Iowa and drive to Northwood and go knock on their door. So this is the story of what happened when I went to see the Eckharts. Northwood, Iowa is a quiet little town about 20 minutes off Interstate 35, an hour's drive from Minneapolis. A few blocks of tired-looking brick buildings, several boarded up, make up a tiny downtown that surrounds a single stoplight. It's the kind of place where if you ask at the library for a place to eat lunch, you'll be directed to the R80 gas station and convenience store. I went to Northwood in the summer of 2022 to visit the Eckharts, the family that picked Denis up on the highway that night 50 years before. They lived 2 streets over from the R80 in a 2-story house with white vinyl siding on a well-manicured lawn. It's where they lived since a few months after the crash, where they raised the 2 girls and where they host their grandchildren. Lori lives in Park Rapids, Minnesota, and Cindy lives right down the street. After some understandable confusion due to the unexpected arrival of a stranger with intimate knowledge of their personal history, the Eckharts were welcoming and invited me in. The living room was homey, decorated with family photos, including one of their recently departed Schnoodle Gibbs, and framed words of wisdom. Family always and forever. There's no place like Grandma and Grandpa's place. Craig is a jovial fellow, quick with a joke and a gift for understatement. It's a surprise to see you, he said. Janice laughs easily and finishes her husband's sentences. A note from somewhere in the middle of gypsies, tramps, and thieves was the last sound Janice heard for a week after the accident, she told me. She woke up in the hospital in Mason City with brain trauma and several other injuries. Lori, the older daughter, broke a bone near her hip and was in traction, then in a cast from her waist down for months. Craig fared better, but still has a bum shoulder from that night. Though he teases his wife that her brain still isn't quite right, Craig's shoulder is the only lingering physical effects from the crash. That night on Big Creek Bridge is never far from their thoughts. Several years ago, they traveled back to Bethany, Missouri, and saw memorials to those who had been killed on that deadly 22-mile stretch of highway. The hitchhiker is always the phantom in the story. We didn't really get to know him, Craig said. We didn't have time, Janice broke in. Craig painted Denis's actions on April 20, 1972, in a heroic light. He still remembers hearing the slam of the back door minutes after the crash and realizing Cindy was no longer in the car. He took her back and put her in a nice warm car with a couple, thank goodness, and kept her there until everything started getting sorted out. In the fictional version that he published 25 years later, Denis described those actions differently. And here, I want this to be a PG-rated talk, and Denis named the narrator in Jesus' Son with an R-rated word, so we'll just say F-head here. So F-head takes the baby to a trucker who declines to keep her. By his manner, he seemed to endorse the idea of not doing anything about this. I was relieved and tearful. I had thought something was required of me, but I hadn't wanted to find out what it was. Craig and Janice took me through the events of the night, ended up at a hospital where Craig recalled a moment where all the tension built up from the horrors of the crash were temporarily relieved. He searched the hospital and finally found Denis standing with John Jones, a highway patrol officer who had responded to the accident. Craig gave Denis his bag back. Then Craig asked Denis what he planned to do next. "I'm going to take the bus," Denis said. I don't know who laughed the loudest, the trooper or me. We just couldn't help it, Craig recalled. We had been chatting for about an hour when I got out a copy of Jesus' Son and flipped to Car Crash While Hitchhiking. The cult of Denis Johnson didn't make it to Northwood in the 90s or any of the subsequent decades. So when I began to read from the story, a story that had been read by millions and been viewed on the big screen by millions more, a story that was about the most traumatic hours of their lives, Craig and Janice Eckhart were hearing it for the first time. Denis had started the story with a few foggy memories of the chemically aided road trip that brought him to Kansas City. Then his narrator is on the highway, feeling eerily prophetic. My jaw ached. I knew every raindrop by its name. I sensed everything before it happened. I knew a certain Oldsmobile would stop for me even before it slowed, and by the sweet voices of the family inside, I knew we'd have an accident in the storm. The car Denis had climbed into in 1972 was actually a Buick. As I read, the Eckharts noted that the make of the vehicle was one of the few details that was off the mark. They were impressed with how closely the words Denis wrote lined up with their memories. The few deviations from their recollections of the night, such as the fact that he believed the baby to be a boy, were bits of knowledge that Denis could not have known. Finally, we reached the moment of the crash. I was thrown against the back of the seat so hard that it broke. I commenced bouncing back and forth. A liquid I knew right away was human blood flew around the car and rained down on my head. It didn't feel as if Denis had meant that as a punchline, but after hearing that paragraph, Janice started laughing. The red liquid, she said, was actually taco sauce that she'd made to bring to her in-laws. It had been in a Tupperware container by the back windshield. Later, when Craig's father, a state police officer, went to see the remains of the Buick, he mentioned all the blood in the back seat and asked whether it was from the baby or from the hitchhiker. When the story was over, Craig went upstairs to search for some long-buried photos and news clippings related to the night of the crash. Janice called up directions so he could find the correct boxes. He brought them down and put them on the living room floor, and Janice began flipping pages and removing faded photos from the early 70s, mementos of that period in their lives when they were young parents. She told a few stories from those years. Back then, we were the young people on the block, she said. She went through box after box, but the crash photos were elusive. What we need to have you do is go drive down the street like you're going away someplace, because that's when we'll find it, Craig told me. Finally, Janice found the photos. There were 6 or 8 old glossies of wrecked cars that her father-in-law had taken a few days after the crash. One showed the remains of the Buick. The front end was completely caved in. From the image, it didn't appear to be a vehicle from which somebody could have come out unscathed. The knowledge that they had been featured in a movie and a famous book seemed to have far less meaning to the Eckharts than the fact that they now had the answer to a mystery that had vexed them for 50 years. They had been present for a single hour of the life of Denis Johnson, a life that produced poetry and prose that would be read by millions while he was alive and take a place in American literary history. They had, in those few short moments, become part of the experience of a writer who was able to take such moments and, through language, use them to find beauty and agony of human existence. They had crossed paths with him at a time when he was only beginning to understand his calling. But to the Eckharts, he had always been a phantom, one who had vanished after that night on Big Creek Bridge and left them with unanswerable questions. Who was that hitchhiker? Whatever became of him? God, it's nice to know, Craig told me, there's been many times when we've wondered what happened to him. Janice added. Every once in a while, we'd say, I wonder what happened to that kid we picked up on the highway. So that's the story of the real what happened to when I was finally got to meet the Eckharts, and so I have a little extra surprise just for the people here. So well, one of these things, I'm shocked that I'm going to be able to tell you this. I had no idea, but for one, I have Craig and Janice Eckhart right here from Car Crash While Hitchhiking. And this is the part I can't believe this, because I mean, I've been to like other book festivals, like the Miami Book Festival. They have these super big names. They don't have this. We have the baby from Car Crash While Hitchhiking, right over here, Cindy. I mean, I've never met her, but I can't. I'm excited to talk to her, but yeah. There she is, the Denis picked up and put into a car. So, anyway, so that's Car Crash While Hitchhiking. That was my research for that. So, all right.
We know, why did you pick him up? It was rainy and cold, and so he said, we're going to take him to Iowa.
This is a nice family over here. You see a pathetic-looking future novelist. They're going to pick him up,
At the time, I did say, maybe he's on drugs. But that was just the time of the
Oh, they can't hear that. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, here, just say that one more time, and then we'll.
Oh, it was rainy and cold, and he was rainy and cold, so we just picked him up and brought him, and I took my husband, I said, what if he's on drugs? But it was just the time of the time that was just something that happened.
Right from the mouth of the all right. That's a lot of good Denis Johnson material, right? Can I tell you, can I go off and we'll come back to Denis Johnson, but there's one other thing I have to read to you, if everyone's willing. I promise more Denis Johnson material if you want. Well, we have more time, right? All right, I'm going to do this. I'm nervous about this, but so before I wrote this book about Denis Johnson, years back, I wrote another book about a guy named Harry Crews. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Harry, but Harry Crews was, he was kind of like a Denis Johnson figure from the previous generation. He grew up in during the Depression. He lived on a sharecropper farm in Bacon County, Georgia. Had this ridiculous dirt poor upbringing, and somehow he wanted to become a writer, and he became he fought through all of the obstacles, and he became a great writer who was really kind of a popular novelist in like the 70s and 80s. And so I got to know him because you know, like 15 or 20 years ago, I was a newspaper reporter in Gainesville, Florida, and Harry had eventually become a creative writing instructor at the University of Florida, and I was a newspaper reporter there, and I started to, you know, they were making a movie out of one of his books, so I started writing articles about him, and then I got to know Harry a little bit. And at this point, he was old, and he was like a cantankerous old guy who really had kind of, you know, burned all of his bridges. He didn't have a lot of people in his life. So I started driving him around to his doctor's appointments and taking him to pick up his pills and things like that. And so, you know, I would drive him around, and he would tell me his philosophy of life and writing and things like that, and so these sessions of driving around with Harry was what was, you know, kind of what this book grew out of. Anyway, so one day I'm driving around with Harry, and he's telling me about what it really means to be a writer. You know, as deeply into being a writer as Denis Johnson was, Harry was next level. You know, it was like the most important thing that there was. Someone once told me that, like, if there was a fire and his children were in the house and his manuscript, he would get the manuscript. So so anyway, Harry is, you know, he's telling me, we're driving around, he's telling me, you know, the kind of writing that you do is fine. What's really, you know, the test of a writer is to write a novel. You know, you gotta pull out a person's heart and throw it on the ground and stamp on it. You know, you gotta write 100,000 words that's gonna rip out his soul. You know, so this is what Harry and he would say like the other kind of writing, you know, like journalism and feature writing. You know, that's just tiddlywinks. You know, like you could be the best feature writer in the world, and that's akin to being the best tiddlywinks player in the world. This is a line Harry liked to use. So anyway, so he's telling me this, and you know, basically he's challenging me to write a novel. You know, so this is a long time ago, and I didn't take him up on it then, but years later I started to, and while I'm writing this Denis Johnson book, you know, some of the time I'm working on this novel, and now I have a completed novel. So this is I've never read this anywhere. You'll be the first people ever to hear this. Are you willing to listen? I promise it's short. I'll just like a little short section. You will? All right. We have it in this folder right here. So, all right. Okay, I'll read this. So let me give you some backstory on this. So we have, so the protagonist of this novel is, so it's a guy named Nick, and he's also a newspaper reporter, and he was a newspaper reporter, actually. He's lost his job under kind of questionable circumstances. He was a newspaper reporter and whatever. He's unemployed now, and he's driving. He's an early Uber driver trying to make ends meet. You know, this is like 10 or 15 years ago, and he's really not doing well. He's kind of spiraling, and things are going really badly for Nick. And to cope with these issues, as anyone would do, he's decided he's gonna recreate a 3-on-3 basketball game he played when he was 12 years old. So that's kind of his coping mechanism. That's, you know, what he's set up for himself. So anyway, so Nick is so that he's going to go and find all these people that he hasn't seen in 30 years and try to recreate this game, and then write the greatest article ever about this game. So the scene that I'm going to read to you is he was driving Uber. He went back to his apartment, and he's depressed, and he called his friend who's still at the newspaper, and he told him this whole plan of recreating the game. And of course the guy laughed at him and told him he was an idiot, and then said, well, okay, I'll look up these people for you on Facebook or whatever. And Nick says, no, I'm not doing it that way. you know, I'm going to track these people down like a old-fashioned reporter would do it. You know, I'm a reporter. I'm going to, you know, go into get old phone books and just, you know, pound the pavement and find them. No Facebook, no social media. He hates those things. So he's told his friend that, and he's hung up on him, or he's, you know, hung up with him. And now he's in his apartment thinking about this. So that's the scene. We're ready for this? And one other important fact. So the main guy on the other team of this 3-on-3 basketball game was a guy named Craig Pittman. And so that's an important fact to know for this. All right. Are we ready? Yeah. Should I do this? Yeah. Okay. All right. After he'd hung up, I ruminated on his offer, because the guy had said, you know, I'll look him up for you. I ruminated on his offer for a while as I sipped my beer. From the concrete slab of a back porch behind my apartment, I watched a pigeon peck the dirt on the bank of a murky retention pond. The thought of Bratz back at his desk was enough for me to grant myself the rest of the afternoon off from driving. Besides, it was time to start my search in earnest. The key to finding these people, I knew, was patience. But my mask of patience was already beginning to show the first signs of cracking. What would be the harm in giving myself a little head start? Just a tip, a finger pointing me in the right direction. I came inside and I sat down in front of my laptop. I clicked over to LinkedIn, the website for the terminally unemployed and the unabashedly careerist. Tentatively, I typed in the name, Greg Pittman. The screen quickly filled with a cascading queue of Greg Pittmans, each accompanied by a circular headshot picturing grinning yuppies wearing neckties and a general aura of self-satisfaction. The bottom of the screen indicated there were at least 10 more screens like this one. I clicked on the Greg Pittman at the top of the list. Greg Pittman, number 1, wore a yellow striped tie and purported to be the global contract director for asset management at Innovation Solutions, LLC in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. A University of Michigan graduate, received high marks in strategic sourcing, procurement, and the undervalued skill of supply chain management. 57 people commend his leadership skills. 34 approved of his ability to work well in a team environment. From the data offered by LinkedIn, I was able to extrapolate that he owned a multi-million-dollar home in the posh suburbs of Raleigh, was married to a supportive yet independent wife, the approximate size, shape, and appearance of Marissa Tomei, leased a new Lexus sports coupe every year and had 2 charming kids in private school, several IRAs, a 27-year-old secretary girlfriend who used to be a college gymnast, loved fantasy football and jiu-jitsu, and went to sleep every night worried about nothing at all except maybe which Bahami, how do you say that word? From the Bahamas. Resort, Bahamian resort. I typed it. I should know how to say it, right? Resort to which to take his family over spring break. Luckily, he had dark brown hair. The real Greg Pittman was blonde, so this bastard wouldn't be allowed to play in the game. Suck on that, Greg number 1. Greg Pittman number 2. Red tie, blue blazer, glasses, look on his face that said, I could buy your home and have you expelled from it by 2 p.m. today. Senior consultant, Highmark Incorporated, Sacramento, California. Volunteers for junior achievement at Elmwood Elementary. Exemplary skills in both vendor management and process improvement. Again, I pulled the data together and completed the profile. Happily married with an exciting experimental sex life. Cute children who were cared for entirely by the beautiful Swedish nanny. Enjoys golf and wakeboarding, respected by all his peers, loved by his parents, feared by his enemies, very likely to be chosen as commencement speaker at his alma mater, not listed but definitely Ivy League, falls asleep quickly every night without the help of alcohol. His face was too puffy and his neck was too fat to be the real Greg, so he wasn't playing either. I silently prayed for him to have a slow, painful death, then I clicked down to the next entry. Number 3, senior project specialist, Anatech Industries, a wizard at analytical chemistry. Number 4, full professor of mathematics, University of Virginia. Number 5, managing partner at McNally Capital, LLC, private equity investor, consistent cash flow, opportunities for significant growth. I clicked down the list for a few more minutes through the senior vice presidents and regional directors and chief information specialists and software engineers until enough of a pattern was established. Each Greg Pittman was more successful and content than the previous ones. The Greg Pittmans of America formed an elite class in which all aspirations were obtained, all needs were met and exceeded, petty aggravations did not exist, and everything tasted like money. I put down the mouse, put my foot on the desk, and pushed my chair back, away from the computer, with enough force to dislodge the wires. The screen mercifully went blank. The low hum of the machine ceased, and a peaceful silence crept across the room. I looked around the apartment with its faded, stained carpet, its cracked Formica cabinets, its 950 feet of living space. Would Greg Pittman live here? Why not? Where were all the Greg Pittmans living in one-bedroom apartments in places called Pinewood Village? Where were the divorced, unemployed Greg Pittmans who hadn't seen their teenage daughters in 7 years? What about the Greg Pittmans toiling away on the overnight shift at Walgreens with no hope of being promoted to assistant manager? Where were the Greg Pittmans currently doing 2 to 4 years upstate for a series of DUIs that ended with a manslaughter conviction? Please, God, can there be one Greg Pittman who has to mow lawns just to make the rent on his rusted-out mobile home, where he now lives since his wife walked out on him for an orthodontist, leaving him filled with a kind of all-encompassing despair, spiraling into alcoholism, contemplating suicide on a daily basis, actually resigned to ending it all, now really just deciding on the method, leaning towards rat poison, but still considering breaking a Budweiser bottle on the wall and cutting his throat with the shards. Is that Greg Pittman out there? Can you hear me? So there you go. Got a little dark there at the end. All right, what time is it? So do I talk more Denis Johnson, or do we do questions, or I have more Denis Johnson, but or do we talk to the Eckharts? What are we thinking? More me or more questions? More just talking straight questions, or?
You should talk more, but I have a question about the novel.
Oh, okay. All right.
Is it called Ted Geltner?
It should be. I'm still looking on a title. I might use that. I don't know. Well, let's see. What does this end in how many minutes does this end in? 10. So should we do questions? Do people have questions? Oh, I do, yes. Questions? If anyone has a question, we'll take it, and if not, I'll do more stuff. All right.
Do you have a biography of Harry Crews? Do you have a biography of Harry Crews?
Yes.
Name?
Yeah, I wrote a biography of Harry Crews. It's called Blood, Bone, and Marrow, and yeah, Harry's is a great. There's great stories in there. You know, I've been telling people that, like, Denis Johnson is a great story. You know, there's so much in his life and everything, and you know, tremendous, incredible writer. But if you know, Denis Johnson is a person that, like, he can just exist in society as a regular person. Like, you know, he just, if you saw him at the store, you wouldn't know, you know. Harry Crews is not like that. Harry Crews is not part of society. He's just Harry Crews, you know. He's one of one. So, yeah, he's a real interesting subject. Great writer and good things.
I can show the mic.
All right.
If anyone has a question.
I would think there are people in the audience who knew Denis when he was in Iowa City, and I'd like to hear some of their stories.
Anyone here know Denis? Other than these?
I did, but I can't remember. He was my neighbor.
Really? When was he your neighbor? What?
On South Capitol Street, it's now the Pentecost Garden, and I lived at 307, he lived on the corner, and it was when he had his son, Morgan. What was your question? Where? Oh, what, when?
Uh-huh.
In 69.
Oh, okay. So when his son was a baby.
69,
Yeah.
70,
Wow.
yeah.
I would have liked to find you like maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah, and they went to daycare with my kids.
Really? Wow. I know I've talked to other people who had their kids in that daycare. It was like a communal daycare.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Everybody had to pitch in.
Yes.
So this is kind of interesting. So Denis Johnson had to take so they all would, it was a daycare for like young students and adults, and they all had to take a shift. And so Denis would, he would make sure his shift was like in the morning, because he said he didn't like taking care of kids, so he wanted to just be there before they showed up and just read the newspaper.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, I may. I have another.
So I'm impressed by, I feel like this must have taken so many years and hours and just the lengths you went to find people. Do you have any other stories about like how you connected with his family or friends? Like any anecdotes of note?
Yeah, let me think about that. Like, yeah, I mean, no, I found, well, I'll tell you. So I started out like I really didn't have much of a starting point. So I got out the directory of the Iowa Writers Workshop from, I think, 1975 or something like that. And, and 74, 75, and I just started at the A's, and I went down and started calling people, and some of them were writers, and just kind of kept on calling, trying to find some sort of an in, and trying to think how I finally, like, from that, like I would get people like, oh yeah, I kind of knew him a little bit, and then at some point, I found this guy Maury who was like his best friend, or one of his best friends, and he was hard to track down too. And eventually, and he was really close with Denis, and they both decided at some point. Like Denis was a big poker player; he loved poker. And the two of them, in this period of his life where he was just kind of aimless, they decided they were going to be early professional poker players, And Maury was, and Denis was the guy. He had this book about poker that he memorized all the ways to win at poker, and he had Maury. He said, and he sat down Maury and said, "Okay, you have to play." This is the way you're going to play the hands. I'm going to give you $50, which is a lot in 1974 or whatever. And, just play like I told you to play and don't drink. And so Maury starts to play, and he's winning. He's got this $50. He's got it up to like, 150 or something. And then he says, well, I think I can have one drink, right? And so, and he does that, and then he has another drink, and then he lost all of Denis's money. Yeah, so...
So obviously you had a personal connection to Harry by meeting him. How did you decide to start writing about Denis? What's the connection?
Yeah, I mean, it was really just like a love of his writing. Like I was one of the people in the 90s when Jesus' Son came out, and Jesus' Son, it kind of made its way across the country. It wasn't a bestseller, but people started to find it and pass it on, and people said, you have to read this, and it was, kind of like in the young adult at that time, everyone got it at some point, and I was one of those people, so I always knew that he was a writer that I liked. And then, I was looking for a subject, and not a lot was known about him, really. He hated doing profiles. He would, and I didn't like this fact as a newspaper writer, but he would just blow off newspaper reporters because he didn't like to get interviewed. So there's not a lot out there, so it was an interesting thing to kind of, to find all the stories. All right.
Did you look into his recovery at all from addiction or alcoholism?
Oh,
do you know if
yes, no. So that's a big part of his story too, is that he was, I mean, he really was an addict, and then when he kind of conquered that, or, you know, he was, you know, this portion of his life that I was talking about, and then when he came home, he kind of hit rock bottom, and he came back, and he was in this kind of this old school AA treatment center in Phoenix that was like in an old abandoned hotel, and he was in there, you know, locked up for a month or whatever, and he came out, you know, and really from then on till his death, he was like a hardcore Alcohol Anonymous person, you know. He dedicated several books to it and everything, and so and he became a sponsor for people, you know. So yeah, it's a kind of an interesting part of his story too.
Are there any more books of his that are coming out, especially the poetry? I feel like there must be poems out there that were never published.
Yeah, I don't think that, you know, that it's there because he sold his archives to the University of Texas, and there's, you know, 70 boxes of material down there, but there's not like unpublished. Well, I don't want to say that definitively, but I don't know of anything in there. Like with Harry Crews has a thing in his archives at the University of Georgia that it's like locked, and it says no one can go in here. You know, it's like it's a manuscript that he wrote and then thought after his death, you know, like before he died, that he wanted to say, even the people who go to the archives are not allowed to see this, you know. I think, like, you have to get permission of his son, and you know, he told his son, who controls his archives, people are going to come and try to publish stuff that I didn't want published after I die, and I want you to you know, forcefully yell at them and, you know, threaten their lives, basically. And my publisher for that book actually tried to get one of these published, and the son did exactly that. But with Denis Johnson, I don't think there is. But poems, like you say, maybe there is some poems out there.
What about the Des Moines play? Do you know anything about the Des Moines play, and if that'll ever see the light of day again?
So, about this play that he wrote. So he became a playwright, and he wrote a bunch of plays later in his life. And one's called Des Moines. I'm pretty sure this is the one that I saw. Do you know the play?
I didn't get a chance to see it.
Because I saw a play in New York, and I'm pretty sure that this is the one. And it's a great play. It's about, you know, it takes place in Des Moines, and it's based on some characters from Iowa City. And but yeah, now that you say that, because some of his plays have been published in book form, but that one hasn't, and it's really good. And it was a good production in New York, and then it was some like, so Denis kind of became friends with a lot of actors who were either in his movie, the movie Jesus Son, or other plays that got put on. So it was a lot of, like, Michael Shannon was in it and stuff. So it's out there, and yeah, maybe they should publish that as in book form. All right. Anything else? Thanks. So we should wrap up. All right.